All right, well, we're going to jump in. It's 12:01, and I anticipate that we will have more folks joining us as they leave one meeting and hop into another. But welcome, everybody, today. I'm Lori Zimmerman, the Director of Professional Learning with MASA, and we are so excited to welcome Laura and Krista back to talk with us. Billy Joe and Deb, I think you were both at the last session, so you got to hear them previously. But just kind of moving from looking at that people data to how can we take care of our people? I think as we all talk about staffing shortages and how to attract people, making sure that we're taking really good care of the folks that we currently have and keeping them employed as long as we can with us is certainly a goal. So I will turn it over to Laura and Krista to introduce themselves further. As I do that, I just wanted, they know, but I'm going to let everybody else know that we are actually having an MASA staff meeting at Quora today. So I'm going to turn off my camera and attend to both meetings simultaneously. But if you need anything, Laura and Krista, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
And I will continue to let people in. Can they automatically enter?
I
Lori?
let Darren in. I'm going to set that up to do that. Yep.
Okay. Just enabling or disabling the waiting room. Perfect. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, welcome. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I am Laura Iden. You were both in attendance at the last? No,
Deb wasn't.
Okay. Deb wasn't. Billy Joe, you were. Okay. We are, yes, happy to be here again. We are both from the Center for Effective School Operations, also known as CESO. We're located in Northeast Minneapolis, an educational consulting firm that supports school districts operationally. So with everything wraparound services, including transportation, communication, finance, HR, technology, and facilities. And so we can really support a district with all of their operations. And our goal is so that you can really spend more of your energy where in the classroom or with your people taking care of kids. And so today we're here, we have established oops, let me make sure I can, there we go. I'll just quickly give my own background. I've always been in education. I started out as a teacher and moved into an instructional coach role and more administration role. Have supported student teachers at all levels, and now have been working with CESO for almost a year and a half, working with, again, primarily HR departments, but also a lot of superintendents as we think about making changes to rethink possible in schools in order to really again, increase efficiency and effectiveness in our operations. So we have created an assessment known as the Human Resources Operations Assessment. And that assessment has given us a ton of insight into all of you as clients and potential clients who are telling us what is happening in schools right now. But we have an assessment that would give you a baseline of what's going well in terms of process and structure, what might you need to change, and some recommendations. So what we've been learning through this process, we're here to share with you today, and our focus is really on taking care of your people and what we know is best practice right now. So that is a little bit about me, and Krista, you can introduce yourself and then we'll get going.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. As Laura said, my name is Krista Zerbies. Laura and I are counterparts in terms of running our just overall CESO HR team in that division. My background has been on the human resources side of the world. I started my career in HR on the nonprofit side of things, and then moved from there into school districts and supporting school districts with human resources function before coming over to CESO just under 2 years ago to help kind of get CESO HR off the ground and running. My focus, our topic today is one that's very near and dear to my heart, because I really firmly believe if we are doing a good job of taking care of our employees are going to stay with us for a very long time, instead of just instantly going to the next thing or the next thing or the next thing. So it's something that I think is really critical to operational functions and to school districts in particular. And I'm just excited to be with all of you today.
So today our main agenda is we're going to talk about taking care of your people and what does it really mean in 2024. So we know that there are some external factors out there right now that are contributing to what many are calling us big staffing shortage, and we know that to be true. What does it mean to really take care of your people right now? Is it the same as it's always been, or what has changed? Whose job is it? So I think we love to talk with different school leaders, because I think there tends to be a bit of finger pointing in the area of, well, that's teaching and learning's job to provide professional development, or that's HR's job to provide compliance training, or that's superintendent job to build up the capacity of their leadership. There's all sorts of ways to think about the ways we take care of our people. I would argue it's everybody's job. And so we all have a role in how we do this. And we'll talk about that today. And then just hopefully planting a seed for you to think about what changes might you make in your role, and who you might leverage and what you might change as it relates to taking care of your people. I know we're a fairly small group right now, so we're not going to do a breakout, but we are going to I'm going to open up and invite you to share. As superintendents and district leaders, I just want to open it up of, what does this, even when we say taking care of your people, what does it mean to you, and how do you as an organization currently do that through your lens? So feel free to just unmute yourself, and I'd love to just hear some ideas of what you interpret it's going to help me. I, again, have a teacher background, so I always love to see what current ideas are before we dive into what we believe is taking care of your people.
I would say for me, when I think about taking care of our people, I am the executive director of teaching and learning at an intermediate school district. And so taking care of my people means giving them the tools and support that they need so they can in turn do their job with students and feel successful, and that students are making some gains.
Perfect. So around tools and resources primarily to do their job really well. I always use the term create the conditions for people to be successful.
Yeah,
And
I also think it's listening. I do a lot of listening, going out into buildings to listen to what do they think is going well, or what are they most proud of in their program, and what things do they want to see change, or what are areas of growth.
So gathering that feedback.
Yeah.
Perfect. What
I was
else?
going to add too, like we talk a lot about, educating the whole child. And I think we have to think about supporting the whole person when we think of supporting our employees too.
Do you have any examples of ways that you feel you do that as a district?
Oh, we offer a lot of flexibility with leave time, and our certain days that are a little bit more flexible, and we make them so on purpose. We do like a wellness Wednesday where we do have one of our counselors leads short meditation after school. We have therapists in the school that staff can access to, and during their prep time if they wanted to do that. So those are just some examples.
Yeah. With a great focus on wellness, which we'll talk about. Yeah.
I really liked what you said about working with the whole person, because we don't think about that in the workplace sometimes. I think you think like when you get to work, you've left your personal life at the door behind you, or you left it out in the car. And really, that's just not true. We bring our whole selves to work the same way that students bring their whole selves to the classroom every day.
I would just add too, we recently completed a strategic plan. So we're in the first year of our new strategic plan. And one of the things that we built in to one of our commitments was just that our employees feel satisfaction in their roles within the district. So we do an annual survey with about 10 pretty simple questions to gauge where people are at and what we could be doing differently to support them. But much of like what Billy Joe said, we do similar things like, yoga. We have Be Kind Mondays where we wear Be Kind shirts and promote that initiative. And just again, wellness activities, outdoor activities in the wintertime on a PD day, snowshoeing, things like that, where it's just something different. But yeah, that's one of the things that we're trying to gauge is just how people feel about coming to work every day and supporting kids.
For sure. And that's one thing too. Well, we'll talk about at the end is how do you know if what you're doing is even working, right? Because
Mhm.
when you're doing an annual survey, right, you're getting that feedback. There's a lot of organizations out there that are doing what we call random acts, right, of taking care of your people, but it's maybe not in a strategic plan. It's not talked about on a regular basis. And so how are we really measuring what's working and measuring what's actually related to retention and keeping people there? And we know that, again, things like Wellness Wednesday and yoga, maybe at least when I was teaching in early, 2010, was not a thing that really we were focused on, right? So there's been a big shift and we have to pay attention to that. Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing. We're going to keep moving. This is just a sampling of, again, we come from an HR lens. And one of my questions, oh, there we go. I just have to click one more time and I got it'll show up. There we go. Our HR lens, and again, whole person, keeping that in mind. This is a sampling of what we are going to talk about today when it relates to taking care of your people. So high level, the onboarding and offboarding process, right? From the very beginning, what is their experience like in your district, even applying for a job as a potential candidate? And then once they are a new hire, how are they given, what are they given everything? Are they given everything they need to be successful in their new role? So again, going back to Deb's comment of creating the conditions. When we think about leaves, again, this, and I was just having a conversation with someone that said, well, that's just HR's job. Yeah, it is HR's job, but it's a really important piece. We know that leaves are at a pretty high number right now of people requesting leaves and out on FMLA for various reasons. It's not just maternity leaves, right? There's all sorts of reasons why people need to take leaves. And so what happens when employees do need to be out? Do you have systems in place and processes and people to support your people through that process? Again, this is high level, and then we'll talk through each of these. Performance management, I think of a huge way to take care of your people is by telling them how they're doing at their job, right? And I think we do a really good job with teachers. I don't think we necessarily do a good job with everyone who works in a school district and letting them know how they're doing with their performance. So that's another way to take care of your people. Another one of those really specific HR things are accommodations, and I'll just highlight workplace injuries as well. We think of that as a really transactional piece, but it's actually quite not. It's very relational when someone is requesting accommodation for their work or they get injured at work. It's a big deal. And so how do we really pay attention to our processes and people in part of that process? Our employee experience, so in general, very similar to what Darren was commenting on. How are they giving and receiving feedback? How are they recognized and celebrated for the work they're doing every day? And not just, again, randomly, but how are we as a district really supporting that? Often, I'll just say this because I kind of laugh at it. I shouldn't say I laugh at it, but it's true. I do a little bit when the only answer we get for how do you recognize and celebrate employees is years of service. I think we can do better than that. We can do better. That's important, right? We want to celebrate people who are loyal to the district and stay a long time, but there's also so many other ways and things we need to recognize and celebrate. Total compensation, we often think about, yep, how do we take care of our people? We pay them. Yes, we do. And we want to think about what that really means for compensation benefits in general. And then lastly, development. What opportunities, again, if you're in the world of development, of teacher development, you know this very well, but what development opportunities are you offering your employees? And we'll dig down into a little deeper what all of this means. But again, this is just a sampling of what we're looking at when we come to assess this in your district. So Krista, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about onboarding and offboarding.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Laura. So really some of the key things that we're looking at here, Laura did a great job of setting us up, is thinking about what's the experience of our employees as they enter our system in terms of not just their application, but all the way through those first 90 days of employment and their orientation process. And then also on the flip side, how are we taking care of people as they exit the organization? When we think about the onboarding side for just a minute, the term that we've used a lot internally at CESO with our own employees and then also with some of our school district clients is how are we rolling out the red carpet for them? How do we make sure that our new hires feel welcomed and valued and appreciated, not just in terms of the seat that they can fill or the role that they can do, but just for who they are? And are we truly excited to have them in our organization? And the way that we onboard them, I think, shows that. So that's things like, do you have all the technology that you need on your first day of work? Do you know how to get around in your building, where you can put your lunch, where all the bathrooms are there close to your classroom? Are there colleagues that now you've had a chance to meet, and you can start forming relationships with these new teammates of yours, beyond just who their classroom next door neighbor is? When it comes and in terms of communication, when we think about how well are they informed throughout the onboarding process, that can be things like, when I filled out my application, someone got back to me right away, so I know that they saw it. After my interview, someone followed up with me to tell me what the next step was in the process. There's been a big shift in the last couple of years, where new hires report being ghosted by their employers or ghosted by recruiters. So HR owns a piece in this as well. We can't just schedule an interview and then not connect with that person to say, okay, here's where you're going to report for your interview. Here is the time that you're going to be coming in. Wanted to make sure that you have this beyond just, well, we sent the email. So they should know. It's also following up after the fact that they know that, yes, we appreciate that you came in to take the time to interview. I think sometimes what drives this is people are not scared, but I think nervous to give feedback to someone that they've decided not to hire after an interview. And so it's almost easier to just not follow up with them. But really, then what we're doing is a disservice to ourselves, because that is ultimately the way that you take care of your people comes out in the way that your employees and your prospective employees are talking about your organization to other people. And that's where we see some of that come out. When it comes to the orientation process, this is where we're looking at not just, did you sit down with someone and you got all your benefits information and you talk to payroll and kind of when you're going to get your paycheck, but it's thinking about how do we get this information to you in multiple ways. So this could be, you've got some virtual options so that you can get some of this information on your own without having to sit down with someone for 3 hours and have them, read through a script in terms of, here's the things that you can expect. Here's what you need to know. Here's your paperwork. Are we also then providing an in-person opportunity for people who maybe need a little bit of extra assistance through that process, or would just really prefer a personal touch, or they may have some really sensitive questions that they don't feel comfortable just asking in an email setting, and they would rather talk to someone face to face. How do you make it really just accessible for all types of employees that you have coming in? And one of the other pieces that we think about here too is just, is your orientation for your employees I get to welcome people to our organization, or are the people responsible for orientation in your districts thinking it is more of a have to, I have to go and do orientation for these new employees today. I don't have time for this. I really wish that this wasn't on my plate. That's the unsaid pieces behind the I have orientation today versus, oh, I get to welcome all these new people to our district today. It's a shift that I think is key to make. And then also, what role does your manager play in that orientation process? Is it they understand from start to finish, here's where this person is at in the process, here's what's coming next. I get a chance to meet them during their first, orientation session with the district, or is it HR does the orientation and then we pass them off to the principal, and then what happens from there, we don't know. I would really encourage you to think about how your managers also have a really key role in welcoming employees to the district beyond just district office staff, in terms of, technology gave you your equipment, payroll talked to you about your paychecks, human resources talked to you about your benefits, and then principal, we might talk to you next week when we have time. Just a couple of examples there. And then when it comes to offboarding and how do you take care of people as they exit the organization, this is an area where I think we as employers don't often consider it. I think there tends to be this notion of, well, they're leaving. Okay, they're gone. We don't have to think about them anymore. But really, if you are taking care of people well as they exit your organization, they become, number one, an ambassador for your organization. Even if they were leaving to go somewhere else, they might not have been leaving because they were disgruntled. They could have just been leaving because it was time for them to go back to school, or they got a better career opportunity with a different district and they needed to take that next step for themselves. That doesn't mean they would never come back to work for your district again. And if you treat them well on the way out, you may very well find that they make their way back to your organization in the future, and or they will continue to recommend you as a great place to work to their colleagues, former colleagues, to their family, their friends. And so it really helps to increase your district's reach in terms of employees and how do you get to more people.
And I'll just add too with the orientation, I think that that's one of the biggest learnings I think we've heard is we often meet with clients who say, well, the reason we do it is because that's the way we've always done it, right? We don't necessarily take that pause to rethink a process that isn't broken. It's working fine. I was working with a client who very much was in a mode of I stuff folders every Wednesday. I meet with everybody in this big room, and no matter who the employee is, they have to hear this information because this is just the way we've done it. And so I think we often, and just by us kind of nudging and saying, well, could you change this process or bring people together who all, because a lot of people have something to do with orientation, right? There's a lot of different departments that play a role. And so how could we redesign and really think about a better way to take care of our people right from the start? Because again, as we talked about in our last session around people data, we know that people make decisions about an employer pretty quickly and how their experience is going. And so then along with this, with onboarding, taking care of your people data is, again, are you conducting some sort of new hire survey so that you can continually improve the process and learn from your employees and what's working and what's not. As we keep going, I'll talk around employee experience. And there's, again, I highlighted it in the beginning. I think so much of this, and a couple of you already mentioned things like rounding. I talk to people, I go out and I hear how it's going. I understand what the pulse is like in the district with our employee groups. I think any kind of feedback system that, again, gets out of random acts and into really intentional ways to collect feedback from your employees is going to make them feel taken care of in general. I want you to just right now think about the last time somebody asked you, like, hey, how's it going in your job right now? And what could maybe, is there anything I could do to, help create better conditions for you to be successful? Is there anything that you need right now? I think that action alone is going to make people feel valued in a way that they're not maybe used to, because we just move so fast through our days and don't necessarily focus on that. So that can be done really informally through rounding. It can be done formally through engagement surveys, whether that's annual. We never want to over survey people. We talked a lot about ways to collect feedback in our last session. And you want to be careful about ways you do that. But I think in general, again, a systematic approach, because what often happens is certain buildings within a district will collect feedback, but we're not, as a system, as a district, really collecting and looking at what feedback we have from employees around their experience as an employee there. When it comes to recognition and celebration, I think there's so many creative ways that we can be recognizing and celebrating employees, and all employees, right? We of course, we're going to focus on teachers in a school district, but I think that there are so many other groups that and clients tell us this all the time, especially as it relates, again, going back to orientation. They say, well, our teacher orientation in the fall is excellent. But if you start in November or December, you don't really get much of an orientation. You kind of just start your job, right? That person is going to be set up in a very different situation than someone who gets the hoorah at the beginning of the year. And so I think, how do you, again, focus on all employee groups, no matter when they start, no matter what kids they're supporting or what role they play in a district, and make it a culture of celebration, recognition, and making people feel really valued in their role. Same thing with employee complaints. What systems do you have in place when an employee does have to bring up an issue that might be more sensitive, or a complaint, or some sort of employee relation issue? Do they know where to go when they have something that they want to bring up? I think this, and I'm going to talk about this a lot, manager supervisor training, a lot of what we're talking about, especially from an HR lens, if you have really strong leaders of people, and that's where you, as a leader of a district, pour your energy or into those leaders of people, they will then know how to take care of their people. And a lot of this will be taken care of, right? So when we think about how do you train your supervisors and managers of people to be really good at collecting feedback, to be really good at recognizing and celebrating your employees, to be really good at understanding and listening to an employee who might have a concern or a complaint. That's, for me, we say it all the time, leadership is culture and culture is leadership. Leadership is going to be what sets everything else in line. And so we want to think about, how are you investing in those people to create so that they can best take care of their people. and understand what experiences are like. But again, this really just goes back to during our assessment when we're asking these questions. The answers have been showing us that some of these things are done, not a lot of it is measured, right? So we want to think about, you might be doing these things, but who's looking at the data and what are we doing with it is the biggest takeaway, I think, from this. Also, please, if you have questions, drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. Again, this is such a small group that we want this to be conversational. So if you have examples of things or just want to chime in, please do so. Chris, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Right. So then when it comes to leaves and injuries and accommodations, I think Laura highlighted at the top, sometimes we don't think about these things as part of taking care of your people. We think about them in terms of a process and, is it happening or is it not happening? And it's not just about, someone is going on leave. Yep, we're making sure that we're getting that leave process. We're getting their time off entered in the system, or they had a workplace injury. We filled out the first report of injury. We got it off to the work comp and we're done. Accommodations. Yeah, we're working on getting a doctor's note. I think when we come at it in terms of process, it's really easy to go, okay, this isn't part of taking care of your people, but actually I think these are very central to how do we take care of our people, because unfortunately, for things like injuries, they will probably happen to your employees at some point. May or may not happen on the job, but leaves will touch a huge part of your employee population. And again, not just in terms of parental leave, for having a baby or adopting a baby, staying home to bond with that child, but also things like surgery or taking care of an aging parent or taking care of a child who needs to be gone for a medical condition. It's things like that. They're so extremely sensitive and confidential. It's such I think, a fragile time for employees when they're in that situation. And by us taking care of their leaves, we are taking care of our people. So it's some of these questions up here are things that we look at in our assessment process. So it's not just what happens when an employee needs to be gone for an extended period of time in terms of, well, they fill out a leave request form and then we put their time off in the system and we stop their insurance if they're gone for too long. It's things like who's meeting with that person to walk them through next steps of the process. How does that employee know what they're going to be able to use in terms of paid time and what happens if and when that paid time runs out? Is someone actually connecting with them face to face to help answer these questions? Because again, it's such a sensitive time if you're in a state where you need leave because now you've been diagnosed with a medical condition and you need to have a surgery to correct it. Or as I said, you're adopting a baby, or you are having to be gone because your parent is getting older and they've now been diagnosed with dementia. And you need to be able to take them to appointments and things like that. It's a very difficult time for employees, and it really helps if they can have a person to connect with to walk them through everything that they need to know and what their next steps are. And then on the flip side of that, when they come back from leave, what are those processes and systems in place to welcome them back to their role instead of just, okay, you're back and now you've just picked up exactly where you've left off, but who was taking care of their work while they were out? And is there any sort of knowledge transfer that needs to happen in order for them to understand what all happened and where they can pick things back up? Or is it that none of their work happened while they were gone and they just have to sort it out for themselves? I think it helps to really set them up for success if they can come back and not be instantly overwhelmed by all the things that didn't happen when they were gone.
And we do indeed hear from clients that almost every district we've worked with, it's been a case where employees have come back to work and maybe no one knew they were coming back, right? And then what is that experience like for an employee when they're back? So that can happen as well.
Yeah, good point. And then two, I'll highlight here is what is that manager role in the employee leave of absence? There are some things that the manager doesn't need to know. A lot of this does get managed by human resources when it comes to just that confidential nature of it. And like it or not, your manager is probably the closest person that you connect with on a regular basis. You may not contact HR frequently, or your district may not have an HR function, in which case the manager has a really central role to play with situations like this, and they can help to support their direct report as well in terms of what do we need to do so that you feel supported while you're gone? And to make sure that then you're also not having to work while you're on leave. Because one of the ways that we take care of our people is we allow them to be gone when that's what they need to do, and to not be, still checking in with them. Obviously, there might be a couple of roles, like your superintendent may not be able to be gone on leave and fully disconnect in a situation like this, but really, from my lens, that's what I would want for every single employee, is for them to be able to access the leave they need, and then know that their role was taken care of. And the manager plays a key part in doing that. And then for workplace injuries, we touched on a little bit. It's not just, do employees know how to report an injury at work? That's the main question that get asked, but it's also, what I think about are, what are all those things that happen after the injury gets reported, besides just filing the first report of injury with workers' comp, but how are we checking in with that person, especially if they were injured so badly at work that they needed to be off of work for any period of time. Some of what we've seen is that the longer an employee is out from a workplace injury, the more difficult it is for them to return. But if someone is engaging with them and connecting with them, it gets them back to work sooner, and it gets those restrictions lifted more quickly than they might otherwise have been. So it's, I think a lot about how are we continuing to check in regularly with those employees once they've been injured, so that then they can feel heard and seen. So really my main takeaway with this particular slide is going back to thinking about just not, are you processing leaves? Are you handling workplace injuries? Are you following, an accommodations request process? But how are you doing those things? Because how you're doing it demonstrates the ways that you are taking care of your people and helping them to feel appreciated, valued, and seen. I think you're on
There we
mute.
go. Now I'm good. Another way to really think about taking care of our people, and I touched on this a little bit, is performance management. So how are you first identifying talent, whether that's top talent, or how do you really identify who is, what performance looks like across all employee groups? So again, I'm going to kind of say the same thing, but it's in a different way. With, we often, we have teacher evaluation, right, as part of our processes, but do we have evaluation in place for, say, operational staff and teams that work at the district level? I've been surprised by how many clients say that as we're interviewing their HR team, their finance team, their district office operational teams, asking when the last time was that they received any feedback on their performance. And oftentimes the answer is, I've never really received any kind of performance review. And I'm not here to say that an annual performance review is the way to go. I think that there are many, many ways to manage performance. And I think the biggest way is to just have really strong manager feedback on a really regular cadence, and have that relationship be at the center of performance management. But then how do you, if you've identified top talent, again, that can be done through some sort of a 9-box, a talent management matrix. There's lots of ways that districts and organizations go about this. But first of all, I think it's important to have one, right? Have a performance management strategy so that people understand that they are being indeed looked at in terms of performance. And then how do you develop and invest in your top talent? So when we talk a lot about investing in your people, investing in your leaders, those are really good conversations to be having, to not just take care of your leaders, but to build capacity for your leaders to take care of everyone else. How do you address low performers? I was just in a conversation yesterday around the reason we address low performers is because you want to keep high performers around, right? Like you want people to be able to really feel like, yeah, leadership is looking at performance and it matters, right? And we're having those tough conversations. Your top talent is looking at that all the time. And so that, again, we're sometimes really afraid to have these conversations. I worked with a group of lead custodians on just this, around how do you give feedback on your performance for your custodial night team? How do you do that? Because they had never, and I don't blame anyone for this, but they had never been trained on how to truly be a manager or supervisor in this role. And therefore, they didn't know how to provide feedback. And so I think we really want to take a step back and figure out, what have you addressed or not addressed as leaders in terms of what our expectations are with performance management. Another question to ask yourself is, what does succession planning look like in your district? So when we think about top talent and identifying, investing in people, you want to think about who is your next, we talk about this a lot, your next business manager, your next HR director, your next technology director, teaching and learning. Are you building capacity for people to truly progress in a way that makes them feel valued? And then they're going to stay, right? They know that they have a place and that they're hopefully going to grow in their talents and skills to be able to continue giving back to your district. Billy Joe, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say the hard part is you're addressing low performers and now they're not feeling supported. So that's where it gets tricky, I think. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I always talk about the balance of pressure and support, right? We have to address low performance, but we have to balance it out with tons and tons of support. And so what systems and structures do you have in place to support them? And then it really does get to the time of, yep, you don't want people to feel unsupported. They want it, but people always, and this is something that Patty McCord, who is an HR, she's the former CHRO of Netflix, but she always says people can handle anything when it's true, and they want to know the truth. And I think treating people like adults is another big theme of hers, that for the most part, that is what we want, right? In our employees, we want to treat people like adults. We want to be treated like adults. And a huge part of that is, tell me when I'm off, tell me when I'm doing something wrong. We are in general afraid to address performance, I think. So, but again, it might be hard in the moment, but you do actually, it's a way to take care of your people.
Yeah.
So then going back to, how do your operational teams receive information about their performance? That goes back to my example of, I just continue to hear that there's really not a lot of systems and structures in place for district office specifically, or those department that are not necessarily kid facing, to be able to receive any kind of feedback on their performance. I have been hearing more and more from clients that paras are now getting more and more feedback, right, and performance evaluation, but it's not spreading super wide after that. And so we just want to go back to that manager supervisor training. How are you building capacity for your managers and supervisors to provide this type of feedback? Anything else before we move on?
I was going to say, just to highlight here, the importance that a manager or supervisor has with their employees. I was reading an article earlier today, actually, that popped up in a newsletter that I get on the human resources side of things, just talking about how employees, in particular Gen Z, there's a trend of these employees turning to AI, artificial intelligence, like tools like ChatGPT, to give them advice about their career, because they've asked their manager, or they are waiting for it from their manager. They want to get that feedback. They want to have a conversation about where they go next in their role. And they're either not getting that information from their manager, or their manager wasn't equipped to have that conversation with them. And so that didn't happen. And they got advice that was just not working for them. And then now they're turning to other tools outside of people that they could be developing close relationships with to get that information instead. So I think it just, thinking about that while Laura was talking about the slide and just going this, it really just highlights the need for managers to get that learning for themselves so that they feel comfortable having those conversations with employees, not just from the performance standpoint, but also where, if you're thinking about investing in your top talent, where do you want to go with your career? What other skills do you want to learn? What are the things that you want to take on that you maybe are ready to do and you're just waiting to be asked? It's little things like that that really help. But for that, managers don't, generally you take on a manager role and then everyone assumes that you just know what you're doing and you don't continue to need support from there, which is, I think the article just shows is just not true. Managers need support just as much as their direct reports do.
Yeah. And especially like the career conversation of just how do they know how to have a development conversation, right? Because there's also development conversations are different than performance conversations. And how do we differentiate between those two and really, again, build capacity for managers to do both? Krista. I muted you instead of me. I'm so sorry.
That is okay. I am here. So moving on to talk about total compensation for a couple of minutes. These are all, it's such a key part of taking care of your people. And it's one of the most central pieces that we have is, like Laura said, we pay them. We give them a paycheck. We give them things like insurance and benefits and things like that to get to that total compensation package. That may not be a primary reason why people leave, but it's definitely a huge part of why they stay. So when it comes to compensation, one of the things that we really think about is, what is your compensation philosophy? And it's not a question that I see employers think about a lot, particularly on the school district side of the world. And I think some of that comes from just the way that school districts are set up, where a lot of the way that you compensate people, because that's really what a compensation philosophy is how are you compensating people, and are you doing that in a thoughtful, strategic way? And a lot of the way that we set compensation in school districts is tied to collective bargaining agreements and the negotiations process. And it's it just makes that question a little bit more complicated, but I also don't think it makes it any less essential. It's really being thoughtful about how we're compensating people and why we're doing it that way, what we're hoping to achieve out of that. Are you looking at, do we want to be the highest paid district in the marketplace? Do we want to be somewhere in the middle? Do we want to just be higher than this district down the road where we keep losing people to? Little things like that can help to define what that philosophy is, and then the strategy that you're going to use to execute it. When it comes to employee benefits, in here, we're not just talking about the insurance benefits that you offer that are already in place between medical insurance, dental insurance, life, long-term disability, those types of things, but it's also expanding on that definition of what is a benefit for employees, not just on the insurance side, but other benefits that you offer to stay competitive. I really liked at the beginning of our time, we were talking about the ways that you're already taking care of your people. A couple of you highlighted things like Wellness Wednesdays and yoga and having access to therapists on site for staff to be able to use. Those things are huge benefits that set you apart from other districts around you. And to expand on that just a little bit more, we think about that in terms of employee wellness and well-being, but then how do you think about not just what people have access to when they're at work, but what's the flexibility that you provide them in terms of, do you have any wiggle room for people to be able to work remotely or work on a more flexible schedule? So if they needed to leave, they could still get their work done without having to automatically use sick time, different things like that. It's really trying to expand beyond just the traditional benefits that we offer, but then to go back to how do we measure these things? Do you think about what types of benefits your employees might need based on the other characteristics of your employee population? So things like, do you have a lot of individuals who are going to be approaching retirement age? So then how do you have more conversations with them about the value of their 403B contributions, and how do they maximize those, or what other things should they do to prepare for retirement? So it's doing that kind of benefits needs assessment of what other things might you put in place to support the employees that you currently have, who can then take advantage of it. And then when it comes to communication, it's not just what do you pay people and what benefits do you offer them, but how do you share that information out with employees? Do your staff actually know what their total compensation is and why it is set that way? Or is it just, it's posted out in our HRIS and people can access it, or they might not actually be able to see the total value of their compensation because it might be stored in multiple different systems. So it's getting thoughtful about how do we show that we're taking care of our people through sharing about their total compensation package. Anything else you wanted to add, Laura?
No, I don't think so. I just think, again, we're continuing to learn about benefits in a more holistic way, right? The whole being of benefits, and getting away from what you said of not just health insurance, but what types of other. And I think that's another trend that's happening in 2024 outside of our education industry, but it's really watching what companies are doing to, for example, to kind of offset the cost of going to work, right? Because we know that now all these, and this doesn't apply to education as much, but the return to work types of initiatives that are happening. What are employers doing for their employees to make it worth it for them to come in if that's what they want, right? Like what types of other benefits are they offering? So I think the more that we as in education can learn from other industries too about what's working and get out of our mindset that we can't possibly offer that type of flexibility, I think we're going to set ourselves apart as a competitive place that people will want to work, even if we start small. And it's another area that we see clients get really nervous and scared around offering workplace flexibility, because we need teachers in classrooms, which we completely understand. And we're never saying that teachers shouldn't be in classrooms. But what we are saying is what system structures and maybe staffing creatively can get you in order for people to have some sort of taste of flexibility, which they can get in many, many other industries. So it's always something I want to comment on. In terms of development opportunities, we've talked a lot at CESO around what leadership development is and how do we've talked today just around your leadership development for your managers. But I think that this is kind of a good self-reflection of what do you believe? And I'm curious because I know, Deb, if you're an executive director of teaching and learning, again, this is your world, right? You believe in developing people and continuing to push teachers specifically to be the best that they can be. When we look at these questions, though, I believe in development opportunities for all staff. And I kind of want you to just think through like where you fall on this scale as we go through this. Somebody owns staff development in the district. Now that might be somebody's, but really just thinking about that, because sometimes we see that really again gets missed. Our teachers have excellent development opportunities. Some employee groups receive more development opportunities than others. Our managers and principals know how to take care of their people. These are just some kind of prompts for you to think about as you're trying to identify maybe some gaps in system of how you can best take care of people. It's usually when we do a tool like this, it's pretty clear like which groups can stand out and you go, oh, they haven't gotten any kind of PD forever, right? We don't ever pull that group together. And also like I encourage clients and school districts to really think creatively about this. We don't always have to think in employee groups, right? Like how do we pull people together, whether it's everybody or a group of people, to really like gather around an initiative, even if it's on something as basic as like the way we communicate with each other, the way we deal with conflict in our district, right? Like development doesn't always have to be an external person coming in to teach us a set amount of things or a set, curriculum. It doesn't have to be your internal teaching and learning department doing it all either. And so who in your organization can help own development of people? Because we also just know that people entering the workforce right now are choosing employers for one of the reasons is that they are going to be continually learning and continually pushed to grow in their skills. And so development is a huge piece right now that we need to pay attention to, especially in the industry of education. We're teaching and learning organizations. We should be all about this. And I think this, again, we've talked about this, but I'm going to highlight it one more time of how are your leaders currently trained on how to be managers of people and what are their gaps? Some areas of focus that we've talked about today, but it's worth repeating. We know this in 2024. I was just reading this as well, that your leaders of people need to be really good at conflict resolution right now. We're sort of, if you think about all the things in the world and you step out of your own district and out of Minnesota and out of even the country, and you think about, I think half the world right now is having elections this year. I think that we know that climate is a topic. We know that DEI was a focus. I say was because 2020 was a different time for DEI work, and now people are looking at it really differently. They're expecting it to show up differently, and a lot of organizations have kind of shoved it aside. There's just some really hot topic issues that are going to make people be in conflict, and and that comes out in the workplace. And so how are we prepared for that, to take care of people in conflict and be okay with conflict and be comfortable there? So when we think about leaders, how are you proactively positioning those leaders to be ready for some of that? Effective communication. We know that this is always a thing that we need to be better at, right? We live in a world of emails and texts and Slack and not talking as much face to face. I still am very old school in the way that I like to pick up a phone and have a conversation, because I just think we can get so much more to the point. So I think the focus on effective communication, it will be forever here, and it matters more than ever right Workplace flexibility, we've touched on, employee wellness. These are the reasons that people are choosing to go to work or to pick their employers. And so we just want to think about, how are you building up your leaders to be able to be comfortable with this and talk about it and be able to address it. Krista, anything else here? Any thoughts or questions as you see this up here of, do you feel like your leaders are prepared, or anyone who really manages people? Perfect. I just have one more slide, and then time for any questions or comments, but this goes back to the measurement. So how are you measuring the effectiveness of the ways you're taking care of your people? We talked about so many ways to take care of your people. I encourage you to think about one of the ways that you are doing it, and how might you measure it, so that you can really answer, how do you know? Because we often hear clients say like, oh, we're really good at, once they get here, they stay, and we know we're doing something right. Well, what are you doing right? What's working? How do you know? It's a question that I, as a parent, feel like I ask my children all the time, because they make stuff up all the time. But guess what? We all make stuff up too. We go on our hunches, we go on our gut of what we think is happening. But when we make really informed, data-driven decisions and can tell our story, and we talked about this in our last session too, we know our people data so that we can tell our story. So we can make decisions and then tell our story accurately. As leaders of districts, that's absolutely your job to be able to do. And it's a way to sell your district. Again, if you can say, here's what we offer to employees and here's what they say about it, that they're staying because of this, or they love their district because of this, you get to tell that story. So I think measurement of this is really, really key to remember. Krista, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. So then, as we just round out our time here today, we just wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts so that you can then make a plan for your organizations as you walk away from this webinar today, or if you're watching the recording, just kind of, where do you go from here and how could you make a plan? So I think first, to go back to that measurement piece, it's looking at what might be missing from what you're currently offering to your employees, or from the ways that you're taking care of your people. We've talked a lot about a bunch of different areas and a bunch of different ways that taking your people could look like. So it's thinking about not just what are you currently doing well and how could you measure that, but what might be missing that you could start doing. And then a piece that we like to come back to a lot, so that we can continue to get out of our silos of, well, that's finance's job, that's learning and teaching's job, that's human resources job, but how do we continue to partner across our organization, and who could you involve in terms of making that plan, and then taking some steps to move forward with any items that you're looking to implement, or even just ways that you're going to measure things. And we like to leave the visual that's at the bottom here of just, because I think it's helpful to show as a cycle of, this is also not something that you're ever going to be truly done with. I mean, it's the same thing if we even to just think about job descriptions, for example. As soon as you've written a job description for a position, that position has changed. We live in such a change-centered time. Things are changing all the time, and they're changing faster and faster, and becoming more complex. And so it's really important to not think of this as just well, we've decided what we're going to do and we've done it and we're done. We don't have to think about it again. But it's thinking about not just starting this, but then how do we gather feedback along the way and then use that to refine our process, and then continue that cycle, so that we can continue to take care of our people in ways that make sense, not just now, but then going into the future.
So we thank you so much. If anyone has any questions or needs any resources or help in this area, we always love to share. This presentation, I believe, will be available for you as well and sent out after. And both of our emails are at the bottom. So if you have any questions, either now we can hang out for a few minutes, or you can get back into your day, but we really appreciate your time today.